Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I want to do some speculation ahead of San Diego Comic-Con 2024. So we're currently in a situation with this event where the panels are going to be announced the week of July 8th. So basically next week at some point we will find out what Avatar stuff is or isn't happening at the panel. And then the convention itself is happening at the end of the month, July 25th to July 28th. Again, typically the Avatar stuff is either on like the Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. A lot of the times it's in or around the Saturday, so more towards the end of the convention. But SDCC along with NYCC during each year are some of the few times that we go into an event properly expecting news about Avatar stuff, because a lot of the time it just kind of comes out relatively randomly, but here is an actual event where there's a big expectation that they'll actually say something. And as we get closer and closer to Avatar Studios, the true return of the franchise, like it's already a little bit back because of Netflix Avatar, but it'll be even further back when obviously the animated Avatar Studios stuff comes out. The expectations grow heading into these conventions. So let's jump in with straight away expected panels. I would be very surprised if we don't end up with these two. Braving the Elements podcast panel, they have done one of these the last couple of years, and I don't see them stopping because they're right in the middle of like their book 3 stuff at the moment, and it just seems like the timing is like ideal for why wouldn't you do one of these? It's pretty well known, it's an expected thing, and it allows you to kind of have a kind of notable panel that maybe you give some news at, but if you don't want to do that, it's still something that people, especially in attendance, kind of can look out for. And then the standard publishing panel that we've had for many years with Dark Horse, Abrams, and Magpie, and then typically they sometimes throw in stuff from other publishers as well, but we're probably going to get that. I think historically, New York Comic-Con has been the better convention for like comic news as such, but it could change. It's all about timing basically. And then just in terms of the sort of speculation about like other stuff, I would be very surprised if we did get a specific Avatar Studios panel. Like they just announced like Avatar Studios panel, Mike and Brian are going to be on it, some other people from Avatar Studios. I think we're probably a little bit too early this year to get that. There's maybe a slight chance, but I do think it is just a bit too early. I'd be pretty confident, unless there's some major delays for Avatar Studios stuff, that next year's convention, so SDCC 2025 and New York Comic-Con 2025, those two should be pretty exciting next year, because I think there would be the absolute expectations for pretty much the big reveals of Avatar Studios stuff to happen there, given that it will be effectively like 6 to 9 months to go until the stuff is starting to come out. Whereas because of where we are right now, we're still a year and a half away. Might be too early, but I think there is still, and as we'll get through as we go through the more specific speculation, I still think there's a chance for Avatar Studios news to happen at this convention. It's just probably not the highest thing, obviously. So straight away we'll start with Netflix Avatar. I feel the timing is just not right for them really much to happen here. Maybe some of the actors will be in attendance. Maybe they'll have like a general sort of like Netflix kind of live action show panel, and like they have I guess One Piece will be starting their filming. So I don't know. Maybe they have some of the actors here, but realistically, not expecting any news. It's probably a little bit too early for like casting news, because that just went out a few weeks ago, and they're going to be starting filming in a couple of months. It's not the time, I think, here. And I think historically Netflix have never gone all in on these conventions for like their kind of debut kind of type things. So Netflix will do an event themselves, I think, realistically, when it comes to announcing their stuff. So just be aware of that. Avatar Studios will tackle it here because it's probably not super expected. Timing, again, is probably not ideal to show anything of note. The movie, of course, Aang the Last Airbender, is now scheduled for January 20th, 2026. So, as I said, we're a year and a half away from this. It's to the point where, like, maybe some very early stuff they should be kind of showing off here, but I do think most of the main marketing kind of building up to things probably will start next year. Like CinemaCon and stuff like that next year will be the start of us properly getting stuff. But there is a precedent for news at the podcast panel if they do one, because a few years ago, it was at the podcast panel where they got Janet Varney to reveal that the first Avatar Studios movie would be about Aang and friends. Like, let's not forget that that's where this happened, is at a Comic-Con panel. That was not some like reveal elsewhere. No, it was timed with the podcast panel. So there's absolutely the opportunity for them to do something similar again, especially because the movie is now a little bit more kind of well known, where we have a working title, Aang the Last Airbender. We know a bunch of the voice actors now. They actually had a bit of an announcement at CinemaCon. So the movie is more well known, and it's to the point where if you're having a notable Avatar panel in any way, can you just fully ignore the fact that there's this hype thing that people are waiting for? You can't really just go into a Comic-Con, have all this Avatar stuff, but be like, no. So they have to start talking about this in some way. I feel one thing they could do is finally officially announce that Dante is back to play Zuko in the movie. We all basically know this to be the case, and it has been sort of reported on. It was included in a lot of the reports from CinemaCon, but I don't believe it was actually said at CinemaCon. It's just the heavy rumor, but I don't think officially they put that out there. So depending on what the situation here is, the panel here could be a decent way to do that, because Dante is of course part of Braving the Elements, and announcing that, yeah, I'm back to play Zuko in the movie would be a very, very cool thing to do. Obviously not the most exciting thing because it's so obvious, but it's one thing they could do that ties into who the hosts of the podcast actually are. I do think they could do something similar to the Janet Varney kind of Aang movie announcement from a few years back, and maybe give like the first statement about the first animated series from Avatar Studios, because we've heard little marketing points on certain books, and we know animated series are in the works at Avatar Studios. It's just that unlike the movie, where at least we've heard a few official statements properly come out, the series has not really been talked about that much. Very scattered, low-key statements. It would be nice to get something more concrete about this, and maybe they could give us a first announcement and like kind of do what some of the marketing stuff has said and be like, hey, it is going to be about a new Avatar. Because that's what the marketing points on some of the books have said, and it's still up there on like Edelweiss on some of those books. That's kind of the hype thing of like the first series is going to be about a new Avatar, and that's a big thing. You can do this without having visuals or anything like that. It's because it's just a basically kind of like text-based, an audio-based announcement effectively. Because especially if this series is meant to come out in or around the movie's release, like that we go movie, not too long, series comes out, and they're actually planning to have a lot of stuff happen back to back without there being years of waiting between each thing. We assume there has to be somewhat of a follow-up to the movie, and the series seems like the most likely thing, because I'm guessing there will still be like a bit of a gap between the movies, which are like, you know, we're getting 3 movies. You know, maybe they could confirm what the second movie is about as well. Like, it's been long enough that it's like, hey, if you're planning to release that movie in any way, like a year or two after the first one, shouldn't you say what it is? You know, that's the thing here, is if we have these releases that are stacking up and they're going to be a few months, a year after this, you're going to have to start to do the really early marketing for some of those things like now and confirm the existence of those things. And this is where sort of the initial slate of Avatar Studios is something they have to announce like at some point soon. Like use the website and what you have to actually say something, because yeah, the Avatar Studios website was like the most recent thing that mentioned that Avatar Studios are working on animated series. So maybe they are ready to finally confirm that, and that will be nice to get something on. And then maybe in terms of a like kind of bigger opportunity, I do think there's a small chance that they release like an initial teaser poster for like the movie. Maybe they actually have a finalized title at this point for what the movie is, because Aang the Last Airbender is a very like functional title, but it's a pretty dull title. So it'd be nice to kind of confirm what you are doing there. And in the same way that there was a lot of hype when we got that kind of, leaked image from the CinemaCon from last year, it would be super cool to get a more updated kind of image to go along with that movie, just to make it feel real. Like a lot of the information we have so far is just sort of text. Give us a more official visual. That would be really nice to get. But is it too early for anything of any real substance? I'm not sure, because you look at, say, the series, like especially Korra is probably the thing we have the most familiarity with, and the kind of lead up to it. Like we knew Korra was a thing like kind of like 2 years before its release now. And now Korra was also slightly delayed. I think it was meant to be more of a 2011 thing. Then it ended up coming out in 2012. So, but still, it's the idea of like they announced it effectively like a year and a half, a year with visuals before it came out. And we're getting into that kind of range with these type of things. Getting into publishing, which is probably where most of the news will actually come from, because there is, I think, a decent chance that there just isn't really anything for Avatar Studios, but we'll see what happens. So we'll start with Legends RPG. We'll start with Magpie Games. Of course, the big thing, the next release for them is going to be Uncle Iroh's Adventure Guide. The pre-order window has gone up. It'll go back up for sale, I guess, once the pre-orders are fulfilled and stuff like that. It's not out yet to anyone. They haven't put out the PDFs. All we know is a rough idea of summer, because if it's not out to anyone by the time the panel comes around, the assumption would be that I guess they'll just talk about this a little bit and highlight that this is a book that's coming out, maybe tease a little bit of this, maybe some preview pages, if the plan is maybe for the official release to be maybe a few weeks after the convention. But who knows, we could actually have this book by the time this happens, and we'll be wondering what Magpie are going to talk about next. A lot is about the timing of this overall. I also would say the only real stuff probably worth previewing would be the Legend NPC descriptions more than anything, and they haven't tended to overly like preview the content of these books necessarily. So we'll have to wait and see what the book actually is. So yeah, there's obviously the chance that they just are like, hey, we've got this book, we're focusing on this book, and just getting it out to people, getting the physical books printed, shipping it out to people, then we'll announce what's next. But given that this was a bit of a extra book, like we were not expecting this one, this kind of came out of nowhere, and it, to a certain degree, it felt like it took the place of what should have been the Spirit World book. They did say they're still working on the Spirit World book, so they haven't like cancelled that, but they've obviously like effectively delayed it by introducing a new product in where it was meant to be. So are they going to talk about the Spirit World book? Because I do think the settings toolkits, which I think is what we're expecting the Spirit World book to be, are the more interesting books, because it's a proper like new edition. Like the Republic City book introduced, I think, whole new elements, real heavy detail on Republic City. The Spirit World, I think, is especially an important thing because the game is very vague about what to do with spirits when they're involved in stories, and they really urge you to not go into the Spirit World as part of your stories, because they obviously want this book to be the thing that actually explains how to do that. And along with that, we're expecting quite a bit of spirit lore, covering stuff about spirits that could be super, super interesting. So I'm much anticipating the Spirit World book, so I hope they preview it in some way. But then also I think beyond that, it's like, okay, Uncle Iroh Adventure Guide is coming out over the next couple of weeks, I'm guessing. Spirit World book, I am going to guess, will be the kind of like this time next year's style book that we're going to be waiting for. But then after that, okay, I guess you'll go back around to another adventure guide potentially, but for who? Are you going to run out of Legend NPC characters at a certain point that are actually interesting and that people actually want? So it feels like the only other thing you can do, as in for like future settings toolkits, is more eras of added to the game. So straight away, the obvious one would be the Yang Chen era, because we've just had books that cover stuff about that era. So it feels like they could do a book that features the Yang Chen era stuff. That could be quite exciting. Otherwise, it does feel a little bit like, are they going to do something like Bossing Say setting toolkit? I do feel era books introducing other characters, like if they did Wan's era, those are probably the much more hype releases that they would have. And then I'd like to know as well, like what are the RPG plans for like the Avatar Studios stuff? Like, are we going to get like the Aang era movie edition of like the characters when they're older? Because right now it's set immediately after the comics. This is going to be a few years afterwards. Is that an era they'll do? Is that a book that they'll do to tie in to release in or around the time of that movie? Who knows? Then we get into novels. So the panel, of course, is going to actually be the week of the release of The Reckoning of Roku. So Reckoning of Roku is going to be out like the Tuesday of the week the convention takes place on. And so it'll be within days of release. So they're going to obviously be selling the book at the convention. They'll probably have the clean cover version as like an exclusive, I'm guessing. And they'll mention it, but as is always the case with these things, a newly released book means that they are highly likely at a panel to not really talk about it much. Mention it exists, mention it's out and it's new, but they're not going to have a full-on detailed breakdown necessarily of this. A lot at the publishing panel depends on like what creatives they're going to have there. And we don't know yet. I'm assuming they probably will try to get Randy Rabai there, but we'll see what happens. But so yeah, the Roku book is not going to be a real focus. If there is a focus, it'll probably just be on the fact that it will be, I guess, Randy Rabai's first time attending a convention as like an official Avatar author. So my only real prediction on the novel side of things is basically, will we know either going into the event or will they reveal at this thing that the next Chronicles of the Avatar book is Roku Book 2. It's the format of these books the way they've been. They've always been duologies, 2 books, but we don't actually know because for whatever reason, they announced it very early on with the Kyoshi books that it was a duology. We had to wait until basically week of release of Dawn of Yang Chen to find out that the next book is going to be Yang Chen Book 2. So are we going to get the same situation here? And then if it's not Roku Book 2, then it's like, whoa, what's happening here? Like, are we doing something different? That sort of thing. So that could be somewhat interesting. The much more speculative thing on the novels is just, hey, is there an opportunity for Abrams to expand out the series of novels and maybe introduce a second series, introduce some more kind of like one-off books that aren't necessarily part of a giant like Chronicles of the Avatar series? Because of course, Chronicles of the Avatar means all of our stories are going to be focused on avatars. But there is room in the Avatar universe for a lot more. So is this where Avatar Studios is going to limit what the novels can do, or are they going to open the doors and really allow them to do whatever they want? I think there's certainly room. I would like to see Avatar get full-on novels instead of YA novels as well, just to create like a little bit of a different kind of tone. I'd like to see us be able to do non-Avatar specific stories. I'd like to see them kind of do stuff like that across the board ultimately, but we'll see what happens here. But I have a feeling the novel side of things could be pretty dull because it's just the timing isn't really right yet. Maybe going into New York Comic Con, if they do the same thing that they did with The Reckoning of Roku, we'll like have the early listing for the next book. But SDCC might be a little bit too early, but I would like confirmation on what the plan is going forward. Because like, I do feel it's almost time to go in that direction with Chronicles of the Avatar, is to just be like, hey, we're going to do Roku Book 2, and then the Avatar afterwards is this character. Because after Roku, the real question comes up of like, do you go back and do Karuk? Even though it felt like we got the main story with him already, there's still absolutely room to do a teenage like Team Karuk, 100%. You can go back and do a third Kyoshi novel, a third Yang Chen novel, but I think people do want to see you do one of the kind of less known avatars. Like, are we going to get an Avatar Zito book? Are we going to get an Avatar Salai book? Are we going to get a book about an avatar we've never got the name of before? Are we going to get more Avatar Wan? You know, there's lots of questions about what they could do once they get through what so far has been the obvious characters to do. But when we get into, you know, unknown territory, what are we actually doing over here? And that's maybe why a second series is potentially a possibility. I'd also really like to know, you know, what the idea is maybe going forward of like, how does this work with relation to the Avatar Studios stuff that's coming out? Like, you know, is there a chance for like a Aang novel that actually maybe bridges the gap between like the comics and the movie? Or something like that. Or is that the comics, that's what they're going to do? Is there a Korra novel that they could do? You know, those type of questions. Then we get into the comics. So obviously straight away, we have the unfortunate situation where this book, which was originally meant to be out in May, is now not out until like end of August. So it's still going to be basically a month after the panel when Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer comes out. It has not been a good year for Dark Horse. There was no free comic book day book this year. The only announcement we've had is Team Avatar Treasury Library Edition, which is like 2 years late basically, but it's cool. A lot of us have wanted that, but it's not the most exciting announcement. So what are we going to do? They've already talked about this book at like a couple of conventions now because of like when they announced it, and we've seen preview pages. So I don't really think they're going to focus on it again. They're just going to be like, hey, it's coming out in a couple of weeks. Remember that. Meaning that, okay, they're not going to waste time spending the whole panel talking about the book that's not out yet, obviously. Meaning that they probably do have to spend a little bit more time on this book, Mystery of Penkan Island. Lots of delays with this one from the early stages, and now more recently with what's been happening with it. Recently, just if you're watching this video without maybe the context of seeing other videos, the reason Mystery of Penkan Island still doesn't have a release date yet is because basically the artist said on Twitter at the end of last year that they had a bad year, and so their progress on the book was quite slow. So that is the main reason, as far as we're aware, for why the book does not have a release date, even though it was like meant to basically be out at some point this year. It still could make it out this year, but I'm pretty sure if it doesn't get announced this month, solicited for this month, for December, it's basically not coming out this year. So if we come out of San Diego Comic-Con without knowing what the situation with this book is, we basically know it's delayed into 2025, probably early 2025, but still not in this year. Meaning that the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer is likely, potentially going to be the only new content Avatar book released this year. And given that we've been building up to Avatar Studios for so long, that has to be viewed as being a little bit of a failure, that the output is so incredibly low on these comics, even though they made the switch to one-shot comics to apparently like ease the load, and so they don't have to spend all this time planning out these more complicated trilogies. They just have the one-shot comics to do, but it seems to have caused even more problems for whatever reason. So yeah, you have to let us know when Mystery of Penkan Island is coming out. or just address more specifically like what has happened to it. Like I said, if it's to sneak into 2024, we either will probably know before the panel starts from listings, or the panel itself will tell us when it actually is coming out. But it's, I think at earliest, there's maybe still a slight chance for end of November, but it's not looking likely. December is a possibility, but I'm guessing this might be the January-February book for 2025. We have to wait and see. This obviously pushes everything back with Korra Comics because the creative team is working on a trilogy of one-shots. So it would be nice to know what the second Korra one-shot is, but given the issues, it's probably asking a little bit much to be told what the next one is. Maybe they'll throw us a bone and actually just like tell us the name of the character, because like I think there's probably a bit of an expectation that like Asami probably is one of the other two one-shots. The third is probably maybe more of the mystery, but we have to wait and see. They could always surprise us with both of the remaining two. Maybe they won't do Asami. Who knows? But we want to know what's coming next, because Korra, there's not been a lot of Korra content is the reality, and it's so unfortunate that we don't have this book already. And so yeah, other than, again, they'll mention the June Iroh comic because it's out next month. They'll mention this because it'll be out in a couple of months and it's the hardcover release. The obvious big announcement that there probably should be coming out of this year's Comic-Con should be what the 6th Avatar one-shot is. So what I mean is like it's the last of the second one-shot comic trilogy, the follow-up basically to Azula in the Spirit Temple and the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, because they tend to do the comics, even though they are one-shots, in groups of 3, especially because they announced this as a hardcover library edition. The assumption is that this now means that the next 3 one-shots will be collected into a library edition. Now, what specifically they're going to call the odd amalgamation of like Azula, a mixed June and Iroh book, and then whoever the last comic is, it's kind of hard to see what the theme is. Whereas at least with the original 3 one-shots, it was like, oh, it's the 3 female members of Team Avatar. So you can just call it Team Avatar Treasury and call it that. That's fine. This one's going to be a little bit more random, but I guess they can come up with a name that makes sense. But yes, I feel that this is just like a very obvious speculation that we know that that book has been absolutely done since like April. That's when you could have requested like review copies and stuff like that, and the people who have got review copies have read it like as of like April. So the book was done like by April, but realistically well before April. And obviously, I guess for distribution reasons and stuff like that, it has been delayed into August, meaning that the creative team, if they did move on to the book to follow up Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer immediately, they should be pretty far along. There should be a cover, like is the assumption. So like, there's no reason that this announcement shouldn't realistically be happening here. Now, when exactly it will come out, that's hard to say. Obviously, it's also in the same situation as like the Korra comics, where, you know, it hasn't been announced so far. So the earliest it will be is like December. So it'll realistically be probably the middle of 2025 book is my guess. Maybe the early one. Depends on what way they do it. Like, are they going to just accept that the Korra comic has been delayed so much, it needs to now be pushed further into next year, and this team, which is a little bit more efficient, their book will be earlier in 2025. Who knows? Who knows what the situation is? In terms of speculation on what this book will be, I find it very difficult because there's no obvious theming to the previous 2 books of like Azula and then Iroh and June. But you would say June is more of the focus as such, I think. So who will the 3rd book be? Like, there's a little bit of theming just in the idea of like, okay, Azula, Iroh, Fire Nation, royal family focused. So potentially this is where maybe the suggestion of May wouldn't be too bad, because that book might involve Zuko, and it's another Fire Nation character. We'll see what happens there. Of the main characters, I would say Sokka is probably, you know, deserving of a one-shot comic. It feels like he didn't get the best run of things in some of the trilogies in terms of giving him an arc. So a one-shot comic might do good for him. But otherwise, I do think Mei is a good opportunity. And a lot of this is like, hey, is this part of the plan? Like, are you going to keep Mei and Zuko broken up and have them maybe get back together in the movie? Or are we going to get them back together before that? And like, what exactly are we doing here is the question like I would have there. But I do find it difficult to predict, especially because they've opened the door now to the idea that we can have like two characters be in a one shot. So, you know, maybe Mei and Zuko, with Mei being the focus, could be a nice way to do this. But we have to wait and see. In terms of like potential other comics, there are free comic book day books, short stories that do need to be collected into like hardcovers. So and other books. So they're not just only free comic book day books. They need a physical release. So maybe a short story collection for Avatar or Korra or could be nice to collect those scattered stories and to offer the chance for some more short stories. Now, the last collection, Patterns in Time, wasn't like fantastic, but it was still decent. But it would very much feel like an extra thing. They had such trouble, though, again, with the release dates on that book. I don't know why. I'd hate to see that happen again, but they do need to ultimately collect these stories. So it is something that is a possibility. I forget the situation of like how many of each do we have left. Like, I think it's just just one Korra comic out on its own, but it's actually 2 Avatar comics. So maybe ATLA short story collection might be the next one. We'll have to wait and see. Then just because Avatar Studios is obviously going to be on everyone's mind, might be a little bit too early, but do they have a plan to do more comics to kind of coincide with Avatar Studios releases? Again, because this book, if it was coming out, would theoretically be either around early 2026, it's too early, but I'd like to know if they do have a plan. And if they could tell us, even tease something like that, would be kind of nice. And then last thing, Beast of the Four Nations. Please, 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 please finally say what is happening with this book. If they don't say it during the panel, anyone in attendance, please, if they have a Q&A session, ask the question about Beast of the Four Nations, about the last deluxe edition book. What's going on? Why has it been such a disaster of a kind of information rollout release? We need to know what's happening with this book. And I think it's probably, it's definitely, I think, become the worst example of Dark Horse's bad communication. That this book, they just refuse to acknowledge for whatever reason. No idea what's going on. But yeah, that is the video. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunity at any of these conventions. The reality of it is that a lot of the stuff that's more the broad speculation probably is unlikely to happen. I ultimately would say I wouldn't expect anything more than maybe a very, very minor Avatar Studios like tidbit. Like I said before, something as simple as just the Dante Bosco is Zuko announcement might be it. And if there isn't Avatar Studio stuff, I wouldn't expect the actual content of the podcast panel, if there is one, to be anything significant. The comics and novels and stuff like that, they're in a bit of a weird spot because releases are going to be coming out very shortly, with, I think, only the next ATLA comic being the kind of main thing they need to talk about, along with finally giving us an update on Mystery of Pencon Island. So it's one of those things where like a lot could happen, but what actually is going to happen, probably not that much. Like I said, SDCC with the publishing stuff doesn't tend to be the biggest one. It may be just the one announcement, like I'm saying, the 6th one-shot comic, and maybe other stuff gets pushed off more towards New York Comic Con as we get towards the end of the year. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are heading into San Diego Comic Con 2024. How much stuff do you think we will actually get? What panels are we going to get? Will there be any Avatar Studios stuff? And what publishing stuff will we get? Let me know, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.